Hi, students. I'm sorry I couldn't be there for the class today. We're going to talk about environmental enrichment. This is something that's important to both research, to exotic animals, and also in practice. This is an important issue. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay. So just to give you an idea of how important this is to many species, if you look at the initial images here on the slide, you'll see that there are some very simple items that you wouldn't even have expected to be used for enrichment, used in zoos. And this is just to provide a more exciting and interesting environment that reduces stress in the animals and allows them to express those natural behaviors. Zoos are very good at this. Now keep in mind, they have much larger enclosures for their animals. And they also need this because zoo animals are wild animals. And to be able to handle them, they also do a lot of behavioral shaping with these animals. So it's that kind of goes hand in hand with this enrichment talk. So let's get started. What I want you to know are the 5 types of environmental enrichment as described by Dr. Molly Bloomsmith. Dr. Bloomsmith is a primatologist, and she worked initially at the Atlanta Zoo. Then she moved on to National Primate Research Center. She has made this easier for us because she's divided this down into 5 different areas. And we'll get into that. Those are the 5 areas that are important for you to know, not just for the exam that you're going to have on Monday, but also this is important for the presentation and the paper that you're going to do. This is part of your project. I want you to be able to distinguish when each type of enrichment can be used based on the natural behavior of the animal. Also understand how this lecture material relates to your enrichment assignment and be able to incorporate it into your project. So environmental enrichment. What is an enriched environment? Basically, it's a way of providing this complex and challenging environment to the animal. It accommodates the physiologic and behavioral needs of the animals. It's something that needs to be goal-oriented, like what are you trying to do or get the animal to do, and allows for species typical behavior. You want the good behaviors that these animals would normally exhibit. So it also provides a sense of security for the animals, and that's extremely important. If they feel secure, they're probably going to be less stressed. So why do we have this enrichment and behavioral management program? Well, animal welfare is a big, big part of this, okay? So the AVMA definition of animal welfare, they defined it about as to how an animal is coping with the conditions it lives in. If an animal is in a good state of welfare, it is going to be healthy, comfortable, well-nourished, safe, and able to express those regular innate behaviors. It wouldn't be suffering from any unpleasant states such as pain, fear, and distress. So good animal welfare requires us to be take into consideration disease prevention, good veterinary treatment, appropriate shelter for the animals, proper management, nutrition, humane handling when the animals do need to be handled or need to be restrained. And also in animals, for example, like farm animals, it also takes into consideration humane slaughter. And as we talked, humane, of course, death, which is euthanasia. Animal welfare refers to the state of the animal, okay? It is the treatment that an animal receives. In other words, the treatment an animal receives is covered by other terms such as animal care, husbandry, etc. So if we're going to protect an animal's welfare, This means we're going to provide for its physical and its mental needs. U.S. legal animal rights definition is an idea, not a law, but an idea that intends to provide humane treatment to animals. It means the right to not be exploited for human purposes, and that the interests of non-human animals should be given the same consideration as similar interests of human beings. So again, that's what the thought is for the definition of animal rights. Under the law, they do not have legal rights. This is more of an ethical and moral issue that we should provide humane care and provide for the animal's welfare. This is also important because of the effects on research. Distress can result in physical and hormonal changes in the animal, but a more comfortable, enriched environment will produce more reliable and reproducible data. Okay, so if the animals are less stressed, you're going to get better data out of it. So it's important not just for the animal here, it's also important for the research that's being conducted. And of course, as we talked in the very first lecture, enrichment is required. And it's required by laws. It's also required by guidelines. So the USDA, of course, requires for the psychological well-being of non-human primates and requires for exercise of dogs. The Guide for the Care and Use of Laboratory Animals are the recommendations that actually are required if the institute is receiving federal funding. For example, if it's receiving funding either from National Institutes of Health, Public Health Service, if it's receiving it from the National Science Foundation. And ALAC, which as I mentioned, was a lot like it's analogous to what we call JACO, or analogous to, if you think about animal practice, AHA. These are organizations that are nonprofits where they are not government regulated organizations. They are ones that are made up of peers, colleagues within those particular areas, and they come and do site visits. And this is like a good housekeeping seal of approval, basically. It's something that says, yes, you are following the guidelines that are set out for this particular institution, whether it's a university, a contracted research lab, a national primate center, etc. You're following those guidelines that meet ALAC standards. So what are the things that we want to ask when we're trying to develop this program? First, we need to know what the species' typical activity is, right? We need to know what they normally do. What is their natural behavior? And then we want to think about, well, what is it we want to encourage? Which of those behaviors can we reasonably encourage in a captive environment? And again, not just the concern about the captive environment, but also is a concern about, is it relevant within the laboratory, or is it something that will not interfere with the research? So it's understanding what's possible for the animal, what's possible for the housing that the animal's in, and for the provider. So the goal of your enrichment plan, what are you trying to get the animal to do and why? What type of behaviors are you requesting that the animal perform that are natural behaviors that would allow the animal to feel more secure? And why is the security important? We know if the animal feels secure, feels like it has a choice or control, it's going to be less stressed. There are behavioral concerns. When you think about it, Artificial environments are ones that the animal does not control. So if you can provide an environment where the behavior would allow them to control some of their environment, that is very helpful. Most of the behaviors require some kind of substrates. Okay, the substrate can be bedding, it can be a type of nesting material for the animal, it can be a type of hiding area for the animal, somewhere it helps make it feel secure. And you'll see some of these in the mice when you're in the lab. The substrates that they're going to want are ones that are compatible with their species' typical behavior. So we have to look at natural history of the animal species, and we also have to look at individual history. So in natural history, the things you want to think about is, what is the wild habitat and what wild behavior occurs in response to changes? For example, temperature and weather. Does this animal hibernate? Is this an animal that is subterranean? Is it terrestrial? Or is it arboreal? What temperature humidity range does it experience in the wild? And then how does it modify that so it can stay within its thermoneutral zone? What are the self-maintenance and comfort behaviors? Is the animal allowed to groom? Is it allowed to make nests? When is it most active? So is it a diurnal animal? Is it a nocturnal animal? What are the main threats for this animal? Is this animal simply a prey species or simply a predator? Or is it an animal that can be predator or prey? Think about house cats. They're ones that can be both. They certainly go out because they're carnivore and they enjoy hunting, and at the same time, they're a small enough species that they could be prey for another animal. And what are the main sensory modalities of this animal? And if you think about that, is this animal more visual, like many bird species are? Is it more olfactory? Think about dogs, for example, and how good their sense of smell is. Is this animal more auditory? Does it use its sense of hearing more? Does it have a different hearing range, etc.? We'll talk a little bit about that when we get into differences in rats and mice. Individual history. This is also very important in an animal. In this case, this is a rather interesting story where you've got a hamster that kind of grew up with a snake. And when the snake was young, the snake enjoyed actually having the hamster around for warmth. So as they grew up together, it's interesting. The snake no longer saw the hamster as food, basically. So it saw the hamster more as a companion. So sometimes this does work. Some of you have probably been to zoos where you've seen some unusual situations where there might be a large cat in with a domestic dog, and they are together. So because they're social animals and there was a companion needed for that large cat. You know, initially when I saw that at San Diego Zoo, I was quite surprised, but the animals were not stressed. You would think that that would be very stressful for the dog, but they were quite comfortable with each other. The other thing to think about is that one type of enrichment does not fit all the species. The animal itself must be considered. For example, there can be differences in strains of mice. There can be, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, you know, there's a small igloo. The mouse is in that igloo. That works great for some of the strains. Then we have other strains that if you have just one igloo in there with those strains, what will happen is they'll be fighting over it. So it doesn't work out well unless you provide more than one of those type of igloos or tunnels or something that will provide those animals their own place to go to get away from each other at times. So there's also something else to think about, and that is if the enrichment you've put in doesn't make sense to the animal, then it isn't really enrichment. That's what I'm trying to express here with the cat and Rubik's Cube, okay? There's no way the animal's going to play with that or find it interesting. Cats are very visual animals and they like rapid motion. So that has something you have to consider. Again, it goes back to what's the natural history of the animal? What would that animal do in a wild habitat? So enrichment is the thoughtful manipulation of the environment, and it's aimed to foster species-specific normal behaviors. Some other considerations when planning enrichment are the considerations of the effects on the science. So in the case here, this is showing you that sometimes products that you put in that you think are not going to cause a problem can be a problem. For certain studies, for example, good lab practices studies, all of those enrichment devices that are put into an animal's cage have to be certified. And certified can be free from organophosphates, heavy metals, organochlorines, etc., aflatoxins, all types of things. So they'll tell you what they're certified for. They're bought from commercial industry that actually specifically makes those items. They can also be contaminant screened. Plastics are an interesting issue because if you remember, I'm sure most of you have seen BPA free. That's what most of our plastics are right now. The concern with that was that bisphenol A or BPA has a estrogen-like effect, okay? And we all know estrogen is a female hormone. So this can actually interfere with research. Environmental enrichment also has to be practical in a captive setting, okay? So this is a perfect example. We know that rabbits like to burrow. It makes them feel safe. So it would be great if we could provide that in an environment like in a laboratory, but the issue with that is going to be related to the animals have to be handled. And they're not naturally very fond of humans until they get habituated or acclimated to being handled. Once they're acclimated, then the stress goes away. So in the lab setting, you'll find that the housing for rabbits isn't going to be a burrow type setting. We have to have them more in a cage that's open, but you can still do things for an animal species like a rabbit that will provide them something interesting in their environment to at least exhibit some of their other normal behaviors. So it's a balance, basically, right? It's a balance between the enrichment, what's practical in that setting, and what's going to affect the science. So those areas of environmental enrichment, they include social, occupational, physical, sensory, and nutritional. Social. Social is one of those areas that relates back to the type of animal. Is this animal normally living in social environments, for example, in the wild? If it is, the best enrichment you can provide for that animal is to put them in a social setting. There are several species that have hierarchies, and that's also very important so that animals know where they are in the hierarchy. At a minimum, it's great if you can't group house them, to at least pair house them. And if it's not possible for you actually to even pair the animal, and this can sometimes be the case for veterinary medical reasons, it could be due to aggression in one animal towards another, etc. You may have to individually house that animal that's social. If you do, you at least want them to be able to maybe hear or smell the other animals so that they can feel like they're still part of the group. The other thing that can happen too, if an animal is more isolated, is sometimes the species, it's okay to have them interact with humans, and that provides some social enrichment. Occupational is the second area, and this gets back to knowing that natural behavior of the animal. For example, foraging for food. That's something that many species do, and they spend most of their time doing it. Since that's the case, you want to provide them the ability to be able to do that. Physical. Physical is placing items or designing their enclosure in such a way, again, that they can exhibit natural behaviors. So think about this. There are species such as birds and non-human primates that love perches. So you want to provide them something higher up with a perch. Think about our house cats. Cats are another animal that absolutely love to be up high. So you want to give them more vertical space in an enclosure if you can. If it's an animal such as a rodent and they are phlegmatactic, and that means they like that sense of security, that's why they will run alongside walls so that they can always feel that the wall is right there. It's important to give them something like a tunnel or an igloo. Give them something that makes them feel secure in that environment. There are other things that animals will also use within environments. For example, we were talking about rabbits. Rabbits seem to love, for some reason, bells and stainless steel bowls that make noise, which is rather interesting because it's such a quiet animal, but they love manipulating those and moving them around. So it really, again, depends on the species. Look at that, look at their natural history and what kind of things are in their natural environment. Sensory. Sensory includes that sense of smell, taste, hearing, vision. What you want to do with that is focus on the animal's strongest senses. For example, cats, again, like something that moves very rapidly. Non-human primates have extremely good vision, and they enjoy watching things that are moving. If you think about dogs, dogs like things with sense. Their vision isn't as good as, for example, as a non-human primate. So dogs actually have, with that great sense of smell, you can provide some things for them that they would find very interesting. So again, look at the species, look at what their strong suit is with respect to their senses. Nutritional is another area. This may include foods that the animals would have in a natural environment or foods that are similar. And again, when it comes to this, you have to keep in mind whatever you are feeding that animal, you must consider its effects on the animal's health and the impact on the research. So just because you like a food and you think it might be great to give it to an animal, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthy for that animal to be eating it. Mouse behavior. As I mentioned, mice are nocturnal, they're mostly active at night, and they have a burrowing instinct. They are thigmotropic, so they actually like that sense of feeling something close to them, right? That's why, again, you want to make sure that you have something in the environment like a tunnel or an igloo, something that will allow them to feel that against their one side. That helps them feel safe and secure. And also, when they do things like build nests up and around themselves and they're inside the nest, that gives them a way to thermoregulate. Mice are also herbivorous. They can be omnivorous, okay? And if in an overcrowded situation, mice actually can be cannibalistic. So that's something to always keep in mind, is to minimize overcrowding, because the mice will take care of that otherwise. And it's very unpleasant to actually see when that's happened. Mice have an ultrasonic hearing range, so they actually hear in a higher frequency range than we do, which is very interesting. It's levels well above what humans can hear. So one thing that we are concerned about, as we mentioned last week in the facilities discussion, is that you would never put a mouse room next to, for example, cage wash, because they are so sensitive to noises. They're also sensitive to noises from other animals. So for example, dogs and pigs, if you have them housed in kennels, they can be very loud when a person walks into that kennel area, right? That's not something that will make a mouse feel very comfortable. So again, that's why we, in a facility setting, we don't keep those animals near one another if we can help it. Remember, mice are preyed upon by many species, dogs, cats, and even some predatory birds. So again, consider where they are housed in the area, minimize sounds and minimize vibrations, because those can really stress the animals out. And you'll see a bunch of abnormal behaviors, and it also has effects on things like reproduction. Visual acuity in a mouse is rather poor. They can see light um, in the wavelengths that's more in the blue-green range, and even into the ultraviolet, but they cannot see red or infrared. So it's a different range than what humans see in. So when you see these small structures, plastic structures that are made out of a red plastic, what's interesting is the mouse feels as though you can't see it. So it works out well for being able to observe an animal while the animal still feels secure, because they can't see the red there. Enrichment for mice. So think about what they do, okay? Again, they're thigmotactic. They do lots of nesting. They like to forage. Chewing's another thing. Of course, they enjoy eating. They eat a lot. They have a very high metabolism rate. They're very social animals, and they do enjoy grooming, digging, tunneling, and also they're nocturnal. So those things have to be taken into consideration. So what does a mouse want? Well, if it's thigmotactic, you may want to provide it some complexity within its cage, which would include something like an igloo or some type of wall space. Because it likes to chew or gnaw, you may want to provide it something that it could gnaw on, okay? It also likes to forage, so maybe the bedding should be something that would allow the animal to do things like digging. It also likes to do nesting. So there are products that are made specifically for rodents and mice in particular that are called nestlets. And that's what you're seeing at the bottom of the screen there. And this is just a small little cotton square. It's about 2 by 2 of cotton fibers, and the animal tears it apart themselves. So you just place the square into the cage and the animal creates a nest out of it. And also remember, they're social. They want to be around other species, other mice of their species, right? Or of their strain in particular too. Now we do mix strains in research at times, but there are considerations with that. So again, whenever possible, social animals should be housed in pairs or groups rather than individually. You will sometimes see aggression or fighting, which does prevent from housing them socially, but you have to gauge that, pay attention to that, see which animals are doing the aggression. For example, in mice, we can often see what's called barbering activities, and that's usually the dominant animal is the barber, and that's the animal that has all of its hair. The other animals within the hierarchy there have been barbered by that dominant animal. If it gets excessive and starts wounding the other animals, then taking the barber out is always a good idea. Rat behavior. So rats are also nocturnal, and they have so means most activity at night. They're very active groomers also. They are also coprophagic. This means that they will consume feces, like night feces, like rabbits do, directly from their anus. It's a different type of feces, and it relates back to that very large cecum that those two species have. It's one that provides them with some additional B vitamins. So that's a normal behavior. So you want to be sure that they have enough space in the enclosure to do this. This is something that's part of them being a healthy animal, basically. They're much easier to train and to handle versus mice. But both rats and mice can be trained to be handled. It just is a lot quicker in rats when working with rats. They are also herbivorous, but can be omnivorous. And also, again, if they are stressed and overcrowded, they can be cannibalistic. They have a hypersonic hearing range, so 500 hertz to 70 kilohertz. So again, they communicate in those higher frequencies that we can't even hear. They're in research, they've actually documented some of those sounds that are made by rats at those frequencies, especially during tickling studies, which is kind of interesting. And we'll talk about that in just a second. They have poor eyesight. Again, they see in the blue-green to the ultraviolet range, so they can't see in red or the infrared range. They also have a very keen sense of smell, and they have a wonderful play behavior. So, social caging options for rats. They don't see well, okay? So if you think about this, what you're looking at here is, if you want to think about it, for the rat, they have that very good sense of smell, very poor vision, very good hearing, okay? And what you're looking at on the left side is the picture of a dog, but this is the way each one of these strains or stocks of rats would actually see that dog. So they have to rely more on that sense of smell and on the hearing to be able to get away from a predator. So rat tickling behavior, there's been studies done on this, and this is very, very interesting. It's a way to mimic play behavior. We'll see if this will actually play okay. So it's just showing you that the animals actually enjoy this, and they run around and look for that hand again to help them. So they can do this play behavior. So it's interesting to see how the rat's following the hand of the person. And then they've actually mapped out the vocalizations. So this is dorsal tickling. Okay, there's ventral tickling. And again, it's mimicking a behavior that a rat might do with another rat. And there's even tail tickling. So it's a wonderful way to interact with a rat. They're actually wonderful species to work with. Okay. So if you get a chance, you might want to go back and actually look at this a bit more. Okay, this just shows more of them tickling it, and it shows the centers within the brain that are activated when the animal's tickled, and then they actually have been able to record the vocalizations. And it's kind of what you'd think of like a laughter from the rat. The rat tickling. There's been a lot of work on that. So let's talk about enrichment for rats. Again, the first thing we want to do, they're social animals, so we want to socially house them. That's what you're seeing in the lower right-hand side of the slide. They also like to gnaw, and so providing them something like a nylabone or an aspen block, a hardwood block, is important so that they have that capability. And they also enjoy having shelters. So you can notice on the middle image there, there's a rat inside of a tube that makes them feel secure and safe. And then there are a lot of rats on the far right-hand side, and they're all grouped together. They're very happy to be in this enclosure all together. So the first thing you want to do, remember, is to house them socially if at all possible. Their vision is poor, so a clear cage and being able to see their neighbor isn't really like the best option because they really don't see all that well. They do have good olfaction and hearing, so if they could hear or smell other animals, other rats, then that's probably an advantage. Gnawing objects, you guys have all seen, I'm sure, nylobones. This works really well, especially for those animals that have to be on a powdered chow. Sometimes powdered chows have additional items put into them, whether they're nutritional or experimental, etc. And so the animals don't have that ability like they would with a hard biscuit type chow to be able to gnaw down their teeth. Remember, the teeth are continuously erupting. So it's really important that the animals have something to gnaw on. Certified, the type of things that are put into that environment, again, must be certified if it's for a good lab practices study. And as we mentioned, BPA is something that we worry about. We don't want anything that's estrogenic or any other type of compounds that could interfere with the study or affect the health of the animal. Gnawing objects, aspen wood blocks are something that work really well. They can be certified and they can be provided in several shapes. Gnaw-proof resting board. So what you're looking at here is called a cozy pad. And that's something that allows the animal to get up off of this wire bottom floor. And at the same time, they can actually gnaw on it too. PVC is another good product that works well for rats. They enjoy that. Again, it's a nice tunnel. And then, of course, resting shelves. Non-human primates. So the issue with non-human primates, because there's so many species, is it's important to understand the variation between these species. Some of these animals are arboreal. So if they're arboreal, they're living up in trees, or they could be terrestrial. They could be on the ground. They do have very complex social interactions in their groups. So there'll be dominant and submissive behaviors that are normal for these animals, depending on where they are in the hierarchy. And they do have a dependence on learned behavior. So they learn by observation. Remember, primates like us, they have good vision. So that's the way they identify and avoid danger. So primates in general have a grooming behavior. That's normal. And in this case, different from mice, the groomer is one that is submissive to the animal that it's grooming. they won't pull the fur out of the other animal. What they'll do is they'll go through and clean the other animal off. Grooming is something that makes both animals feel safe and secure. Foraging for food is something else that non-human primates do and spend a lot of their time during their day doing or performing. They have a variety of vocalizations, postures, facial expressions, and gestures, as you can see here. And so that tells you what's a directed at the individual versus an inverted. And that means they're not going to look directly at you. That's a more submissive animal. There are fear grimaces. That's not a smile that you're seeing there. That's a I'm afraid type look. Threats are things with the mouth open, and they can be very direct, or they can be averted. Their eyes can be averted when they'll do that. And then there are neutral looks. The animal feels comfortable. In general, we don't stare at primates. It's considered rude and aggressive, is probably the best way to put it. So when you're at zoos, don't do that. It's something that makes the animal uncomfortable. It's akin to shaking your fist at someone, okay? It means that you're being aggressive. So that's something that you don't want to do. They have lots of displays of jumping, running, and manipulating objects. Their behaviors communicate information, and it's related again to strengthening their social organization. And as I mentioned, there's allogrooming of the dominant animal by submissive animals. But again, that's okay. They know where their position is in the hierarchy, and it makes both of those animals feel more secure. So what could this expression communicate? It could be a yawn. That's possible, but more than likely, it could be a yawn because the eyes are closed. Another possibility is it could be threat, could be an inverted threat. That most likely would be eyes open. Behavioral management. This is another part of a concern, especially in non-human primates. It's something that in zoo settings, they take very seriously also. And it's something I think to think about because one of the parts of that is behavioral shaping. Shaping is it's a refinement, and it's used to reduce the stress or injury of animals and personnel during procedures. So as I mentioned in the beginning, zoos have to do this because they're working with wild animals. They need that animal to cooperate for certain care procedures. They could be veterinary medical, or they could just be standard animal care procedures. They don't want the animal to be stressed, and they don't want their personnel to be injured because some of these animals are very large and very dangerous. So behavioral shaping is one way to make the animal feel that they're in control and at the same time exhibit a behavior that is cooperative for the folks that are taking care of that animal. It's also used to move animals from, for example, one enclosure to another, which is really important, again, because it's stress-free. It's important for physical examination, especially in non-human primates, the very large, for example, apes or great apes or lesser apes. Those animals, it's very dangerous to be giving sedation or anesthesia to those animals simply to do a physical exam. So a lot of times what's done is the behavioral management team will come in and shape that animal. So the animal will come up to the front of the enclosure. They will allow the veterinarian or the veterinary technician to sculpt their chest. They will allow them to, check on their temperature, body temperature. They'll allow them to maybe even give a medication or to even do things like sample collection, like collect a blood sample from the animal. So this does take some training to be able to do this, but it is worth the time because, again, the animal feels much more secure. And you're also reducing the risk of injury to personnel. So this is just an example. I'm sorry the pictures aren't as good as they could be, but this is an animal who's presented their leg for a sap in its vein blood draw and is perfectly happy doing that. Behavioral management. This is when abnormal behaviors show up. And so interventions must be done to treat the injurious or unwelcome behavior. It's a way of making that behavior incompatible. So the replacement of that negative behavior with either a positive or at least a non-negative behavior. This does take a bit of thought in general, especially with primates. It's an animal behaviorist on a team who works through with this. What's exciting for all of you as veterinary technicians, you may get to work on a team like that sometime, and that's extremely interesting to work with behaviorists. This can be used for several things. For example, self-injurious or self-directed behavior when an animal, for some reason, is directing negative behavior towards itself. There may be ways of putting in fleece boards, for example, to get that animal to groom the fleece board instead of pulling its own fur out. Self-mutilation, this is something that's actually seen in people too. There's ways to possibly pair this with a submissive animal. This animal needs somebody else there. But again, these need to be evaluated by animal behaviorists. Cooperative feeding is another behavioral intervention. That's when you have a dominant animal in a large, in an enclosure where there are several other animals, and that dominant animal is capturing or collecting all of the food. If you want the other animals to eat, which of course you would, you have to figure out a cooperative feeding situation. Again, behaviorists know how to do this. You look for a preferred item that dominant animal may want to consume over a lesser item that still provides something to the other animals in that enclosure. All of this, again, I can't stress this enough, requires evaluation by a behavior specialist. But that is an area that's very interesting and maybe an area that some of you want to go into in the future. It's a very exciting area and very worthwhile. Enrichment for non-human primates. So again, the 5 categories by Dr. Molly Bloomsmith were social, occupational, physical, sensory, and nutritional. So if you think about this, non-human primates, they're social animals and they have that hierarchy. So you want to probably house them socially. Occupational, they like to forage for food, and that's what many of them spend most of their day doing. Some of the species are tool makers, and because they are tool makers, they need to be provided with substrates in their enclosure that will allow them to make tools. And what I'm talking about here are some of the apes, the great apes, like to do things like forage for food, where they'll make a tool and they'll put the tool into a termite mound. This is what's seen in the wild, and they will pull out the tool and eat the termites. This is something I'm sure many of you probably seen on National Geographic or Animal Planet. They're interesting videos of animals doing natural behaviors. That type of foraging can be mimicked in things like zoos. It can be mimicked in non-human primate centers, and it often is. So they set up something that would resemble what the termite mound would be, and then the animals are provided with some branches that they can then fashion their own tools out of, and they can use those to collect whatever is inside of that makeshift termite mound. And in many cases, it's things like honey and maybe some other treats. It could be something like peanut butter. It depends on how they're setting these things up, okay? There's not going to be termites in there because they're not going to set that up, but there are other items that they can put in there that won't interfere again with the normal nutrition of the animal, or the study, but at the same time provide that occupational enrichment that's so important to those animals. Physical, so these would be structural things that are put in. So remember, arboreal animals prefer perches. Animals that are brachiating species, such as siamangs and gibbons, they're lesser apes. They love to swing, so they may need large ropes in their enclosures that are hung up high. They need to have lots of vertical space so they can actually do the swinging from one one rope to another, and they can move across an enclosure that way. Sensory, remember there's visual, auditory, tactile, and olfactory. So with non-human primates, all of those can be utilized. They are very visual animals. So inside enclosures, ones that are inside buildings, sometimes televisions are put in there. It may not be the best type of enrichment, but it provides something interesting, especially if it's very colorful, whatever they're observing, if it's something that has rapid motion that might be of interest. Auditory is another one. Some places play music. Generally, it should be lower, and you have to see what the preferences are for the animals also. What is not going to be stressful for the animals? Like what might be okay for the animal caretaker while they're working in that room may not be the best type of sound for the animals. So maybe nature sounds would be better, for example. Tactile is another thing. We talked about fleece boards. Fleece boards are those things that are put on the outside of the cage. They can be often smeared with honey, and treats can be put on them, or crumbles can be put in them, and the animal has to pick through them. So it's very similar to the animal foraging for food. Olfactory is another one. And even though as primates, we don't have that sense of smell that, for example, dogs or rodents have, dogs and cats and rodents have. But at the same time, that still can be used. So there may be something that has the odor of a favored food, or it could be just a very interesting floral odor, etc. As long as it's something, again, that doesn't interfere with the study. Nutritional. Omnivores have varied diets in the wild, and you're going to find this with non-human primates. So it's more exciting to provide something that's a variety of things in their diet, but at the same time, this is where the nutritionist comes into play. If you have one, for example, if you go off and work in a zoo, you will have a zoo nutritionist, and it's really important that the animals are provided something that still fits in with a balanced diet for those animals. Okay, as you can see here, this is a grooming setting for these two animals. Again, pair or group housing is the best thing you can do for a social animal. And if it's not possible, again, due to something like aggression in one animal, then consider grooming or interaction with humans. This has to be very carefully done and in a safe manner. Again, because it's something that will require either the behaviors to be involved, the veterinarian to be involved in what would be allowed by, say, the veterinary technician or the care staff. Here's an example of one of those fake termite mounds. This was at the San Diego Zoo. You need to know what that natural behavior is of the animals we talked about. They can fashion tools with what's in the environment, and then they can use them to place inside those openings inside that termite mound, and then there's going to be some type of treat provided in there for the animal. Also, how does that animal obtain the food in occupational? Remember, does it forage for food? Does it hunt for food? In zoo settings, a lot of times they will actually mimic hunts for some of the animals that are, for example, the cats, the large cats, and they will mimic that because that's important, especially when the animal, if it's an animal that's endangered and they're going to then release it back into the wild, they have to mimic those situations. Okay, so what you're looking at here in the middle is a fleece board. That's a non-human primate, and they're pulling things off that fleece board. And then what you're looking at on the far right Could be something that is either filled with a sensory, like something that just has a certain odor, or it could be something filled with nutritional. There could be items put inside those openings, and it's a puzzle. The animal has to figure out, how do I get those things out? What's good about that is it occupies the time for that animal that's in captivity. So they're doing something, and they're doing something like they would normally do in the wild environment. Here is an environment from the San Diego Zoo. This enclosure here is equipped with, as you can see, multiple types of structural enrichment. There are the ropes there that are set up so that these animals can actually move from one side to the other. The other thing that's interesting here is these are siamangs that you're seeing, but there's also this animal down here at the bottom that's red, got the red fur, that's an orangutan. So they are not, so you have a lesser ape, the siamangs, in with a greater ape, which is rather interesting. And again, I'll play that again. So you can see the siamangs and that long arm stretch that they have, that they use. There you go, that's animals brachiating. But they seem to be perfectly fine. You can see a young orang over here, okay, doing some play behaviors. So it's important in these types of environment, or these types of, when you've got these types of animals in captivity, it's important to provide them the structural type of environment that allows them to do these natural behaviors. So what's great about perches, they kind of mimic tree branches. We're showing here those ropes. They give these animals the ability to brachiate. And then you can see there's other types of substrates in this environment. For example, there's grass, and grass feels very different to lay or sleep on than the rocks do. So there's multiple things in here that the animals can use, either for natural foraging behaviors, or whether it's play behaviors, or it's just locomotion. Sensory environmental enrichment. So this again includes the sense of smell, taste, hearing, or vision, and it should be focused on the animal's strongest senses. This chimpanzee that you're looking at here is using the sense of olfaction and smelling a carnation on the ground. Of course, some of us love to smell flowers. Carnations in general don't, as far as I know, don't have much of a fragrance, but it's interesting because it's also visual if you think about it too. Nutritional. So this is something that would include foods that the animals may have in a natural environment, or foods that are similar. So always keep in mind, again, the nutritional health of the animal and the impact on the research. So again, social, occupational, physical, sensory, and nutritional, these are the important areas. As we look at in the upper right-hand corner, this was the San Diego Zoo. And if you look at that large cat that's at the top of the rock, and what's below? Just a domestic dog right below. And so they're in the same enclosure, and they're perfectly happy. They're roommates. What you're looking at below that is some structural enrichment that this elephant is actually interacting with. There may be something in there that's actually nutritional, but it's allowing that animal maybe some occupational at the same time if it does some foraging, or it's allowing it to do some play behavior. On the top here with the turtles, you'll notice these are aquatic turtles. But aquatic turtles have to come out of the water sometimes because they need to dry off their shells. So they come out and they sun. And if you notice, these animals are also social. So they're all out on this log. So they're provided the water environment. They're also provided an environment to get out of the water, and a lot of plant material. Down below, you're seeing some penguins with a really nice enclosure that has water in it. And at the same time, it's also got like a waterfall or spray, which makes these penguins feel very comfortable. They've got all types of substrate here because they've got some rocks here. There's also some plant material in their enclosure. That's very interesting. And in the water, in this case, what's interesting is there are actually small sharks in there, which I found to be very interesting, but apparently they're not a shark that's interested in consuming those penguins. And then what you're looking at on the left here is these are native bee houses. This is also from the San Diego Zoo. And it's just something that's put out there from a structural standpoint to help out the native bees. Those are very important to our environment. And I'm a little off track here with that, but it is important that we take care of some of our native species also. And so this is something that the San Diego Zoo has set up. But it is a way of showing some structural enrichment. It's providing some housing for those animals. So one more time, it's social, is for social species. So you either want to pair or group house them. And again, if it's not possible, then you want to consider some interaction, possibly with humans, but it has to be safe. Occupational, so know the natural behavior of the animal. Does it forage? Does it hunt for food, etc.? So what can you provide in that particular type of enrichment that would help satisfy those behaviors? Physical, the enclosure itself. Think about the enclosure and how you would equip that enclosure with items that are similar to the natural environment. Sensory, so think about the strongest senses of that particular species and how you could meet those needs for natural behaviors. Nutritional, again, always include foods that the animal would have in a natural environment if possible, or foods that are similar that would, again, not interfere with the study itself. And then keep in mind nutritional health of the animals and the impact. Just as a reminder, you will have a written plan, and that's due on Wednesday, October the 13th. Your class presentation is going to be due by 1 p.m. that day, because that's when we're going to start with the presentations. The assignment details, those are all written out in D2L. So you're going to give the genus and species of the animal. You're going to discuss the natural behavior. You're going to discuss that animal as a model for diseases in humans or other animals. You're going to describe the housing of the animals and discuss at least 2, ideally all 5 of the enrichment that can be utilized for that animal, okay? And again, this is just pointing out when those things are due. Don't forget to send your papers, your drafts by the 1st of October through the Virtual Writing Center. Get some help from folks there. And please, please read the rubrics. They are very involved now because the English department is going to be assessing your papers also and your presentations. And this is very important for the accreditation of the college. So if you have any questions on this, or still confused about some of the areas, please don't hesitate to go ahead and email or text me, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.